Hello, very beautiful community. We haven't spoken about the war enough in the last few weeks, so we'll correct that in some of the upcoming chats, I think. Because I know that a lot of you follow the war on a day-to-day basis, and you're kind of starved and thirsty for bird's eye analysis of some of the things that you're seeing recur in the day-to-day updates that you're consuming. So we'll do a tiny bit of that today. And so what I want to talk about is Vladimir Putin ordering a increase of the signing on bonus for Russian soldiers from 195,000 rubles to 400,000 rubles, which I think is about $4,500. And I want to read Janis Kluge's 4-point thread about this on X or Twitter, because it's very concisely useful. If you don't follow Janis Kluge, then do follow him, please. He is outstanding on all matters economic analysis in Russia. Janis says Russia apparently cannot find enough men for its military. Today, Putin doubled the federal signing bonus from 195,000 to 400,000 rubles. The regions are supposed to add at least 400,000. Many regions pay much more. So let me point out that if you are signing on, you're going to have potentially up to 4 kinds of payment. You're going to have your salary, but then you can have a one-off payment from the federal level, from the Ministry of Defense. Then you can have possibly a regional payment. And then, perhaps less commonly, you can also have a municipal payment, a payment from your city. And that can add up to quite a lot, especially as the people who are signing on are typically poorer than the average Russian. So for them, it's a very, very big jump. Janis says, in some places, the total signing bonus will buy you an apartment. Signing bonuses make up a significant part of the budget. Russia claims it mobilizes 100,000 men in 3 to 4 months. I mean, that's absolutely that is right. That's what they claim. I think this is a lie. I recommend you to not believe the Kremlin when they say that. It's not, the number is not as high as this. If we assume the total signing on bonus is 1 million, this is 400 billion rubles, $4.5 billion per year. But these costs pale in comparison to payouts to injured soldiers or the families of dead soldiers, which is at least 3 to 5 million rubles. So if Russia losses are really as high as 1,000 per day, the same as the rate of enlistment, this would add 1.2 trillion rubles per year. The crazy conclusion is total signing bonuses and compensation for casualties could be close to what Russia pays in total salaries to soldiers fighting in Ukraine. So let me give you what I think I can give you in my capacity as a political philosopher, or at least as somebody who thinks in general terms about some of these sorts of events and processes. I'm sorry to slap. But first, maybe kind of a prejudice prophylaxis. Obviously, we're talking about Russian problems for the Putin regime. And be aware that I'm algorithmically incentivized to talk about those, and algorithmically disincentivized to talk about problems for Ukraine. Now, I don't comply with these algorithmic requests, but be clear that the algorithmic diet you're consuming is heavily tilted by that prejudice inserted into your part of the algorithm. So when we talk about things going badly for the Putin regime, it does not mean that things are going well for Ukraine, right? If we took a a person now from a remote island in Tonga who doesn't use the internet, and they asked me, how's the war going? Who do you think is winning the war? Given that you take a very strongly anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian position on the war. I would say that's a ludicrous question that you can't answer, except by giving a psychological clue, which would be tantamount to simply sort of sending you off to look back at the different assumptions I make behind the question of who wins the war. And there have to be so many assumptions there because we don't agree on what winning the war means, really. If winning the war is Ukraine reacquiring all of its territories in the near future, then that's nearly entirely off the cards. If by winning the war we mean Ukraine sustaining its sovereignty, you could argue it did that by sometime in 2023. Although there is a question of whether Ukraine's sovereignty might not, in a worst case scenario, again come to be at risk, even though today it isn't. But I would say if you sort of pushed me on this question, it's certainly not possible to say that Ukraine is winning. And in some ways, Russia has the edge. The qualifier to this is that none of the events we're seeing today, and we'll be seeing for the next few months, will make sense in a final sort of way until we see how the whole story turns out, right? So it's very difficult to say definite things about the particular slice of history that we are in. But certainly Ukraine itself has still a significant mobilization problem. It has still not just a problem of insufficiency of help from the West, but a problem of political will in the West being more on the trajectory of decline than acceleration. Ukraine has a huge civic challenge at home because it's only now beginning to transfer out of a discourse of victory as aligned with the reacquisition of all territories, beginning to transfer a little bit into a discourse that's open to talking about the potential acceptability of other outcomes. So this is difficult. And you might say, well, hang on. Don't you, Vlad, say that Putin's project is doomed because he has nothing to offer the world except violence? Well, yes, but that's not necessarily the case in a time scale that people who are fighting for their freedom and independence in Ukraine might be interested in, right? The Putin project will inevitably exhaust itself and end up in a very unpretty culmination, not just for itself, but for Russia too. But that might not happen for 20 years, right? And we're interested in the next 20 years going well for the West and for Ukraine. So the idea that you can sort of rely on the fact that Putin's project is a sort of a maniacal and somewhat cataclysmic and self-destructive journey into a dead end, that doesn't help us because that dead end could take quite a long time. And there's a question of what might get destroyed along the way. And if Ukraine's destroyed along the way to that dead end, well, that's not an outcome anybody wants. So we can't rely on that and sort of fold our arms and then wait for it to happen. You'll be waiting a long time potentially. So that's a qualifier, right? That we're not in a pattern of giggling at the absolute collapse of the Putin regime here. Now, so why are these payments being increased? They're being increased, quite frankly, because that tap is not generating a big enough flow for the Putin regime, not a big enough flow of men. Part of the reason for this is that the trade-off between financial reward and the risk of losing one's life is ceasing to make sense in the previous combination, and it needs to be rebalanced to keep on working. And here we come to how I've just described the situation in my tweet on X today. I said this is war as a hyper neoliberal enterprise, a business deal between potential soldiers and the state. You weigh up death rate versus monetary reward. And this mutes social backlash to losses, because if you go, family and friends see you as gambling on a risky business deal, right? And the implication here is that always there is the possibility for a perception of an unacceptably high death rate to break this deal down. So Putin has doubled the signing on payment, but might he not need to do that again as his mince grinder grinds on? So let's talk about why this is interesting. What we're dealing with is an extraordinarily depoliticized situation. And we're observing the way Russia is politicizing. We're observing the transformation of the education system, that you're now getting education as military prep for kids. And not just military prep, but a kind of fascistized military prep, because what they're being taught isn't just that a particular war might be good, but they're being taught that war is an end in itself. That would never have happened under the communist period. They would have always said there's a particular kind of war and it has its own ideological rationale. Now they're getting that too at school now, but they're also getting a bit of a message of war as an end in itself. And that really reveals the radical right rather than the radical left nature of the Putin regime, right? It's in sharp contrast to the ugliness of the communist period that came before. Is ugly indeed, but it's a different kind of ugliness. It's important to distinguish those. So, despite all of these momentums toward politicization, toward an escalation of the degree of terror in society too, the majority of Russians remain radically depoliticized. And so this hyper-neoliberal business deal, as I've sort of articulated, it looks something like this. Ricky is sitting around, and Ricky is earning 40,000 rubles. Ricky's, living in a peripheral place in Russia, and discussing this with friends and family, and Ricky says, nah, not going to do it. What's the death rate? Looks like it could be 10%. I don't think I'm going to do it. Family first. The garage can wait, the plumbing can wait, the new car can wait, and yes, we're in debt, but screw it. Family first. Health first. Bobby, next door, has a different approach. Yeah, death rate doesn't look too pretty, but this will take us out of debt. And we can do the little extension here. Extend the kitchen a little bit. And fix the plumbing. Yeah, I think we can go. Then Bobby turns out not to survive. What does Ricky say and Ricky's family? Do they treat Bobby as a war hero? No. They don't have that much sympathy because, quite frankly, that option was open to Ricky and he prioritized health and family. Bobby prioritized the risky business deal and ended on the wrong side of it. So the social response here is, okay, well, some of us are going to enter this deal, others won't, and I suppose the ones that do can end up on the wrong side of it, and that's the way life goes. That's the call they made. But you might say, well, doesn't politics come into this at all? Questions of like what the war is about and who started it and who's fighting it. The answer is either yes, in a very limited way, or just no. So what does that look like? It looks something like this. Okay, so that's the business deal, but what is this part of? Well, I don't know. I mean, it does look like they have absolutely lost the plot in Ukraine. I don't know what they're doing. I think they've become probably infected by some kind of American imperialist bug. I mean, who knows what's going on, but I think something is going on there. They're clearly mentalists now. So maybe they're somehow really motivated to do like nasty things and do these wars. What are our guys doing there? Our guys from the Kremlin? I don't know. I mean, could they be as mentalist as the Ukrainians supposedly are? I suppose they could. Could be both of them, as good and as bad as each other. Now, no, please, this needs to be said for YouTube. I am now channeling Russian village conversation. I'm not talking to you about what I think or what you should think. Ukraine is an innocent victim of imperially maniacal aggression, right? No questions about that. But we're just trying to think of how these conversations go. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be that they're as bad as the other side, that our side's as bad as the other side, but hopefully they have some good reasons to do what they're doing. I mean, they're not completely stupid there in the Kremlin, unless they are. I mean, but God knows. I mean, that's the thing about politics is these, big players, mysterious forces, mysterious reasons. Who knows? I mean, you just hope that the bigger mentalists are on the other side. I mean, it could work out that they are on our side. But these are not questions you can answer, right? I mean, we're here, we're Ricky's family here, and there's Bobby next door. These are not questions we can answer. You just kind of cross your fingers and you pray that your side is, got a better case than the other one, but we're never going to know. So it's not really up to us. Up to us is this business deal. So we're really talking about sort of local life here. And is it going to go better or worse for us by us sort of cooperating with one of the warring parties? So you see, it's almost like a kind of colonized discourse. You're almost talking about the Kremlin like they're your colonizer. And they are giving you some kind of deal to fight for them, and you're going to take it or you're going to leave it. So that's this kind of extraordinary level of depoliticization and an extraordinary reduction of a war with a neighbor that was part of the same country as you to a mysterious caused phenomena to which you can only relate as a business transaction. So that's what I call hyper-neoliberalism. If neoliberalism is talking about the magical primacy of the market, hyper-neoliberalism is talking about the magical primacy of the market and construing the market as a war of all against all that's inclusive of actual war. All we can do is relate to this as a business deal offered to us. Everything else is sort of opaque and causally unreachable. Now you see how scary this extreme gets when you get to this extreme of opacity of institutions, right? I mean, we talk about Trump voters feeling opacity of institutions. These Russian folks, Ricky and Bobby in the village, feel that opacity 10x. Right? I mean, this is sort of really dealing with unknowable brain block, forces you can't know. And so you sort of relate to them in terms of a kind of skepticism, epistemic skepticism about it all, that allows you to epistemically legislate only on stuff in your village and stuff in your family's affairs. Everything else is sort of out there, and it's even possible that the enemy is got a more valid case than your side, but you just pray that's not true, and even if that were the case, it's not clear how you'd ever know it. So that's sort of my picture of the sort of cartoonish anthropology, if you like, that's behind this business transaction that Putin is trying to rejig now to increase the flow in the tap. Lots of love talk very soon.